Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host,
Christopher Wells.
The first round of the NBA playoffs is now officially over, and it's really heating up. That means our content is as well. So we have a live stream upcoming, and it's set for Tuesday, May 2nd. So, come through for that. It'll be a blast. We're going to recap, the games and just our thoughts on playoffs in general. Come through, ask questions, whatever. The last one was really fun. It was great. And, but before we get started with today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast. And to kick today's, episode off, we've got to recap the entire, well, not the entire, but, the previous two games of the Kings-Warriors series. So, spoiler alert, the Warriors did come away with the series today, Sunday. So, it was a wild series. I can't lie. It went seven games, but, first we got to talk about game 6 because that did happen in between the time that, we weren't recording. So, to talk about game 6, the Kings came away with it, came away 118-99 victory. And, this tied the series up. And, De'Aaron Fox, he had a decent game. Malik Monk, he had a decent game. But, in my opinion, I think the Warriors just had a flat game. I think that's what it was. I don't think the Kings played the best basketball that they could have played and that they played this season at all. I think the Warriors honestly played some of the worst that I've seen. Jordan Poole, he didn't have a great game. Draymond, not too much. A lot of guys that, you would expect to, have decent impacts on the game. They didn't really do too much, didn't really show up. But, this was a victory that the Kings desperately needed in this series. And honestly, I'm surprised that they got it. What were your thoughts on this one? Because, like I said, there's not much to really say. I think the Warriors just fell flat.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of thought, because we talked about our predictions for how like these, semi-closeout games were going to go. I think we both thought that the Warriors would close it out at home in Game 6.
Yeah.
Because they had a pretty decisive Game 5 victory where it was back and forth, right? But then they closed it out, in the end and played really well. But like you said, they did come out really flat. They've always been a high turnover team, but
Yes.
18 turnovers. Although Sacramento had 19, because they've turned the ball over a lot, this series as well. But even despite how poorly they were playing, like it was still like a relatively close game. It was just that fourth quarter just got away from them. And, aside from Steph in the fourth, they just couldn't do anything. I mean,
Right.
Steph at 29, 9 for 21, 5 turnovers, right? But, again, you'll kind of excuse it. Klay Thompson at 22, but he was 2 for 9, and he had a plus minus of minus 28 in a game, where they did lose by 19. So that's, pretty significant in terms of he had a pretty rough game.
Yes.
Poole, this was his last game in the starting 5, and he was just awful. I thought he was pretty awful for most of the series.
Me too.
And it's just, and I know that he's, kind of playing through, I think, an ankle injury, but I mean, still, you just got to be better. It just felt like he was playing out of control a lot. I didn't love his shot selection for most of the series. Just in general, just a really rough series for him. But again, I think he can be better than that.
Me too.
It's like I said, I think he has regressed somewhat this season, but he's still more than capable of having stretches of play. It's just kind of hard to adjust to a different role where last year for a good chunk of the season he was a starter, and didn't really have to adjust to a bench role until really late. But this season he had just kind of been in and out of the lineup as a starter, coming off the bench, and just sometimes that transition can be tough for guys.
Yeah.
And then obviously, like the conflict they had earlier in the season, I'm sure has a contribution to that as well. But yeah, it just felt like this was a flat game, and it was kind of disappointing, but it did kind of feel like, we lose this game, we still have one more game to win it out. It's kind of like what I mentioned with the Laker Grizzly game 5, right? That Memphis won, where it's just kind of like, when a team is desperate, usually they're the ones that are going to come out hard. They're going to have the most energy. And I just, so like, there wasn't anything that made me think that they were going to lose the series. I was just like, they came out flat, but they'll be better for game 7.
Right.
And obviously they had to win game 7 in order to win, but
Yes.
I thought they were going to win this series. So in general, not a great game for Golden State, but obviously Sacramento, like you said, some guys like Sabonis was pretty bad. He had a plus minus of plus 11, but 6 fouls, 5 turnovers. Defensively was a little better, but for most of the series he struggled a lot.
Yes.
And I think that was kind of like an X factor going into the series was how was his level of play going to be? How is he gonna, respond to being guarded by, Draymond and Kevon Looney, because those two guys were really good on the defensive end.
Right.
Barnes, right? He was, in my opinion, pretty bad for most of the series. I mean,
Same.
just in general, obviously, I know he's a guy that's gotten a lot of flack because when he was in Golden State, he was his poor play was kind of one of the biggest reasons why Golden State blew the 3-1 lead, in addition
Yeah.
to like the Draymond suspension. But it's like even if you got like an average Barnes performance, they still probably could have closed that series out.
Right.
But just he just has a history of just not being great in the postseason.
Exactly.
He's a well respected veteran. He seems like a nice guy, but he did struggle in the series. Keegan Murray, right, got better as the series went on. Right, he was good in Game 6. 5 for 17, but defensively he was good. Good on the boards. Played almost the whole game too.
Right.
Got a great game from Fox. Obviously, he'd been battling a fractured finger.
Right.
So obviously credit to him for toughing it out. At times, obviously, it was a struggle, right? Because in general, when you have a fractured finger, it's hard to play through. But still. But then after that, not really much else. Malik Monk was obviously very good with 28, right? But then you got a little bit from Trey Lyles, obviously, and he was kind of a game changer. But just in general, like you said, I thought Sacramento was okay, I guess. I mean, it's kind of hard to say a team played okay when you win by 19, but like you said, it felt like Golden State was flat and
Yeah.
that Sacramento could have been better. But, obviously you take the win if you're Sacramento. But
Oh
then,
yeah, for sure.
we go into game 7, right? Then it's a completely different story. It was very close in the first half. But in the second half, the Warriors closed it out, right? The third quarter Warriors finally made a comeback because they hadn't really been that good in third quarters this season, but they were great this time around. Steph Curry, 50 points in a game 7. I think the most ever
Yep. He broke
by
KD's
anybody in a
record.
game 7. Yeah, 50 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists. Uh, was the number one reason why they won the game. Obviously, you also have to give credit to Kevon Looney for his 21 rebounds, 11 points, including 10 offensive rebounds. He was so key in the third quarter, to getting Golden State extra possessions, helping Steph and others score. But then after that, not really great performances from anyone else.
No.
Draymond was okay. Wiggins 5 for 16, fine defensively, but Klay Thompson awful 4 for 19.
Yeah, that was rough.
Hit a couple shots, in late, but overall not great. Got nothing out of Kaminga. Peyton had 4 fouls, before blocks. Right, DiVincenzo, not really much of anything. Poole, once again, awful, 3 for 9, 8 points. So this was pretty much, the Steph Curry game.
Yeah.
The one of probably, one of the defining games for his career. At this
Pretty
point in his
historic.
career, yeah, 35 years old, right, to still be able to do what he does. It's awesome. It's kind of funny because I remember, I forget the exact name. I think it might be Justin Trinzi or Trini of ESPN,
Okay.
and I think he had sort of like a format laid out, for how teams can kind of like the basic formula for winning a playoff series, right? Where it's like 2-1-1, where it's like 2 games
Mm-hmm.
where your best player is the driving factor,
Okay.
another game where it's like typically your second best player, and then
Okay.
another game where it's like the role players. This was the Steph Curry game, right?
For
So like
sure.
this was one of the games where like he put the team on his back and pretty much snatched it from the Kings, right? Because again, it was a I think a 2 point game at halftime, so it was
Yes.
still a game.
It was
Golden
close.
State was down, yeah, but I did feel like they were probably going to win because it was like nobody else is really doing anything other than Steph, and they're only down by 2, and it felt like Sacramento was playing relatively well, but so it was like, I think Golden State's going to win, and then they did.
Yeah.
Just moving on to the Kings side, right? Sabonis, had a better performance with 22, 7, and 8, 2 blocks. So he played, his defense was okay at times, but overall, it had been a pretty rough series for him. I think his poor play, definitely, didn't help the Kings in a couple of those games, right? Like the one where they lost by 1. I think that's the one where if you're a Kings fan, you feel like that one got away from you because
Yes.
they were up for most of that game. They really had a chance, to win it, come back in the fourth. But I think it was game 4. Yeah, that was the one where I'm like, yeah, that one got away from you guys.
Right.
And then of course, De'Aaron Fox, this was not a great game for him. 5 fouls, 5 turnovers, 5 for 19. But again, like he was playing with a fractured finger, and just in general, I mean, like, this was kind of a game where it was like it was going to come down to the stars in a game 7, and obviously some role players too. You had a couple of guys for the Kings. Terrence Davis gave them, some decent minutes at times. Obviously Steph, kind of cooked him off the dribble, but obviously that's a very tough matchup.
Yeah.
Um, Malik Monk was okay, right, in spurts, but just in general, just not enough from the Kings, right? Like, I mean, you just needed more. 25% from 3, 37% from the field. Um, Both teams shot awful from the line. I mean, there were stretches where like everybody was missing free throws. I think Steph had a trip to the line where he missed both free throws.
Yeah.
Clay had
Very
a trip to the line
uncharacteristic.
where both. Yeah, Wiggins had a trip where he missed both free throws. It was bad. And then obviously for the Kings, same thing. Obviously in a 20-point game, it doesn't really matter, because like the free throw discrepancy wasn't enough where like if
Right.
you
Right.
make your
Right.
free
Right.
throws, it's gonna make a difference. Obviously, if it was a close game, you're kicking yourself, but it wasn't. But this type of game was kind of one of the reasons why, even though again, we were kind of up and down on Sacramento at different points because I think we didn't feel like they were gonna get past the first round.
No.
Just because, just in general, just the way that they looked in the regular season, as cool as they were, as fun as they are to watch, it just didn't feel like it was going to translate into the playoffs. Obviously, a ton of respect to them, because it was a 7-game series. It went, I think, a lot longer than most people thought. But just the way that Golden State closed it out, that was kind of why they were my pick to win the West, even though they had struggled for most of the season. I just don't think, I think it's just very hard to write off, defending champs when they've been through a lot and they've seen a lot of these type of situations before. And I just thought, against a young team that hadn't really done anything in the playoffs, obviously it could happen, right? Because, like sometimes, when we talk about championship runs, sometimes it ends just like that, where, it kind of just ends right before your eyes. But,
Mm-hmm.
obviously Steph is still awesome. And as long as he's, still like a top flight player, and they have a decent supporting cast, I think they can still win another one. It's going to be tough. It's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
Because I definitely don't think this team is as good as last year's team. Um, but I think they can still make a run. And I think again, it's tough, but it's just kind of crazy. I mean, we basically had 4 first round upsets, right? I mean, we kind of talked about it in the last podcast, but I mean, half of the round 1 matchups, the lower seed won, right? Because you had the Heat beat the Bucks. Um, you had the Knicks beating the Cavs. Obviously you had this matchup with the Warriors and the Kings, and then we'll talk about it in a minute. But Lakers Grizzlies, same thing. So obviously it's going to set up a great second round matchup. Between Steph and LeBron, but obviously we'll get into that later. But just in general, like I said, I can't count out the Warriors. Like I said, they were my pick to come out of the West. I picked them to win the series, as did you.
Yeah.
And I think in this game, I think they kind of showed that like this is why you got to trust them over a team like Sacramento. Because again, as great as the Kings were in the regular season, I just wasn't sure if I could buy into them and trust them come playoff time. They had a chance, right? They
Mm-hmm.
definitely had a chance to knock out the Warriors because almost every game was very close, with the exception, of a couple of games. But just in general, you just can't count out champions. I mean, that's kind of the theme here, right? It's just that, again, because we had a number of guys that had, been successful, and they've struggled this season, but just in general, like, I mean, you just can't count them out. I mean,
Right.
this was a great game for Steph. I mean, he's been awesome this season. I mean, like, some people feel like this might be the best he's ever looked. I still feel like his MVP seasons were like prime Steph, but he's still basically like still in
He
his
still got
prime.
it.
Exactly. He's even at 35, right? He's able to get to the rim with relative ease. Obviously, Sacramento isn't necessarily deterring you away from the rim, right? But it wasn't like a lot of his layups were just like, just easy slight work drives to the basket, right? Some of them were like very tough, contorted flip shots. He's a very underrated finisher around the basket. He's a lot stronger now, and I think that does make a difference, right? You can clearly see, he's put on a lot more muscle to his frame, and I think that helps him, because now he can kind of go through people a little more. Whereas, before he kind of had to like, snake around guys.
Right.
But now he can, I'm not saying he plays bully ball, right? But obviously, he can drive at a more effective rate than he could before. And that's helped him a lot because, again, like not every game, you're going to be able to knock down every shot. So it's important to be able to do both. And you can do that, about as good as anybody. So,
Yeah, this was a tough and rough series. I really enjoyed it though. I didn't think it was going to go 7. I thought it was going to end in 6, to be honest. But the fact that it went 7 definitely shows you, how resilient this Kings team is, and I think they're probably going to be around for a long time. I think that's something that people aren't talking about enough because all the guys are young. Great coach. I don't think too much is going to change on their end. I think the only place they can really go is up from here.
yeah.
And, in terms of the Warriors, I think this is probably going to be one of their toughest championship runs if they do try and, even if they
Yeah.
do, get beyond the Lakers, it's going to be tough because, they've just struggled so much. And I think it's really just fatigue. I don't know what it is, but, they haven't looked like a championship team at times, but when they're like hot and on, like they look like they can do it again. So I'm curious, like what's gonna go down with that. But at the same time, like there's a lot of pieces that I'm just not really hyped about.
Yeah.
Like I'm Jordan Poole is losing my hype. Like it's getting really bad for him. I think it just looks like when he's not set and like when he takes bad shots, it's really bad because they aren't going in. But like when he takes good
Feels
ones, I think they
like
go in.
spiral.
What'd you say?
It feels like when he starts playing poorly, it starts to become like a downward spiral where it just
Exactly.
continues and continues, and you don't feel like it's gonna get better.
And it feels like it transitions to like other players on the team. I'm not saying he's the reason why they're bad or whatever, but
Right.
because they're not bad by any means because they definitely won.
Yeah.
So it's like you can't
Right.
pin it on him, but it's just like poor play all around from everybody, but like Steph and Looney because I feel like Looney's having these like legacy games where it's like he's solidifying why he should be one of the better rebounding centers in the league, and then Steph is just being Steph, but everyone else is kind of just filling in. And I think that's my concern with this team. Like they're just not super strong outside of Steph and Looney, to be honest. Even Wiggins has been disappointing. I know he came back; he's coming off the personal leave, but at the end of the day, I need to see more from this team. But I am impressed with them. I am impressed, but I do want to see a little bit more because, like I said, there's flashes of the great Warriors dynasty that we all know and love, but uh, it's going to be a tough one against this Lakers squad. But I guess we got to talk about LA first before we get into that matchup.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
looking at the
Mhm.
Lake, what did you say? You had something to add?
Oh. Oh no, no.
Okay,
I was just yeah, I was just saying just in general. Yeah, it is kind of interesting, like when you look at it, because again, you didn't really get a whole lot of bench contributions.
no,
Last year, a big part of that Warriors team was, they had a lot of depth guys. It's different this year, right? Because a number of the young guys that they have just haven't really panned out, right? Like, Kaminga had his moments in the regular season, but it feels like Kerr doesn't really trust him
no,
right now. I mean, he's not really playing at all, right? And then, and against a team that plays up and down, you would almost think, putting an athletic guy that can run the floor out there would help, but it feels like he has no trust in him. Right. It feels like he's definitely going more with the veterans, which again makes sense. That's your best players. But
right,
I do kind of wonder, regardless of what happens this season, what happens with them in the future, just because, your core is based around these older guys. And obviously they still can play, right? But then you just kind of wonder, with the new CBA and you got to pay guys, right? Like Clay, you're going to have to pay at some point. Draymond, you're going to have to pay at some point. And you just kind of wonder, like, are they really going to shell out, max money for those guys at this
right,
point in their careers? Like they could be like 36, 37 years old, making 30 plus million a year. I just, I don't know. Maybe they give them less money, but I just wonder because again, with the CBA, you're kind of forced to, kind of make a lot of changes because, once you spend a certain amount of money, like you get really penalized. I think you lose some second round picks. You can't sign players to like a certain amount of money, so it's pretty restrictive. But and then as for the Kings, right, like you said, their future I think is bright. I do kind of wonder what they do with that Barnes spot because again, I
yeah,
get that he's a respected veteran, but I think it would be, kind of nice to have a little better option out there at the wing. I guess Keegan Murray kind of is a wing, but he's not really doing like as much ball handling, shot
right,
creation. Sabonis, I do kind of wonder, again, he was kind of disappointing in this series. Maybe if it was a different matchup, he'd play better. But, it does feel kind of difficult, to have a guy that doesn't really protect the rim as your center, which is kind of, again, one of the reasons why I didn't pick Sacramento to win the
right.
series, just because I was curious how they were going to guard the basket. But just in general, I mean, I think the future is bright, but I think that they are going to have to do some work in terms of kind of like filling in with the margins because there are
Yeah,
some guys, like I said, Fox is obviously a keeper. Um, you know,
Monk.
Sabonis, we'll see what happens. I'm personally more of a Fox guy than Sabonis, but in
Me
fairness,
too.
Fox was bad tonight.
Yeah, he was.
Um,
It didn't look good for him.
Yeah, but and then Murray, obviously, I'm pretty high on now, right? Because I didn't know much about him going into the draft. I knew he was like a 3 and D forward, but
Yeah,
I remember him getting picked was kind of clowned at the time, because he had Jaden Ivey, I think, sitting there, and everybody was like, take him. But he's fitting great, and he struggled during the early part of this first round, but he did play much better to close it out. So I think his future's bright.
yeah,
So it was a great season for them. Like I said, obviously, I'm sure they're disappointed that they lost the series. But, I think if you're the Kings, you still got to look at it as a positive because, I mean, you still went further than anybody thought was going to
You
happen,
can't be
was
mad at it.
possible. Exactly. And you lost to the defending champions, right? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the Warriors have struggled this season, but they are the defending champions. And it's never easy to close out, and eliminate,
No.
the team that won the title last year. Even if they win the title, I still don't feel like it's as good of a team as last year's team.
Right. For sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I guess moving on into the Lakers is kind of a
Yeah.
decent segue. They
Hmm.
wrapped up their series with Memphis. Memphis fans are pretty much in shambles after this one. Lakers came away 125-85. So they basically blew the Grizzlies out. Got to start with the winners. My guy D'Lo, he went off
Yep.
31 points. What a
Hmm.
great game from him. You had Austin Reeves played decent. Anthony Davis played really well defensively, I thought. And, he had some big moments on offense as well. 16 points, 14 rebounds. Vanderbilt had some decent stretches. LeBron at 22, 6 assists, 5 rebounds, and it's like with this game, I thought it was so odd because it felt like the Lakers really didn't need to try all that much, like it just didn't seem like they only needed one guy to go off to win this game, and they just needed to defend. That's all that they needed to do. Um, the Grizzlies shot 30%. It didn't look good. 31% from the three. Like it was just a messy game. Ja Morant only had 10 points. I think, if Ja's scoring 10 points, you're probably going to lose. Desmond Bane only had 15. Dylan Brooks, 10 points. Jaren Jackson Jr., 14 points. It just wasn't good. I don't like this for Memphis. And, I wasn't really too high on Memphis this season at all. I really
Right.
was nitpicking the whole fine in the West thing. I think that was probably one of the worst statements in the NBA this season. But, looking at this team, I feel like the future is bright, especially considering that they didn't have, the center depth that they were missing, especially going up against a team with a great center like Anthony Davis. But, it's just disappointing for Memphis fans. I mean, there's really not much you can really, say about this one except for they played bad and
Yeah.
they spoke too soon, I think, and they just did a lot more talking than actually playing. Dylan Brooks instigating and antagonizing guys, but they didn't let that get to them. And LeBron, he played well this series, I thought. AD played decent this series. And shout out to D'Lo again because that's my guy, but he did drop 31. So yeah, with this series, I mean, there's not much you can say outside of the fact that Memphis was not as good as people thought. And, we did have Memphis winning this series. I think that was just based on the fact that they were, the higher seed, I think, just going off of the logic. But, what were your thoughts on this? Because, you're the Laker fan, and I'm sure you're going to do a whole in-depth analysis. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts
Sure.
on this one.
Yeah, so we both had Memphis. I leaned toward Memphis. Like, I didn't think it was like, a significant difference. For me, I just needed to kind of see how the Lakers offensively would perform against
Right.
Memphis because Memphis also was one of the best defensive teams in the league. I knew going in without Steven Adams and Brandon Clark, right? This was a series that the Lakers would have, an opportunity to win. But I just needed to see what they would do offensively. I kind of flipped and leaned more towards the Lakers after, the first game where I could kind of see, what was going on over the course of the series. But this was kind of why, like, when the Lakers lost Game 5, I wasn't really concerned that they were going to lose Game 6.
Right.
I talked about it in the previous podcast in terms of the adjustments. They went with a shorter rotation. Instead of playing like 10, 11 guys, which, I don't think you should normally do, in a playoff game unless you have a lot of guys playing well.
Mm-hmm.
He went with a much shorter rotation, right? Obviously, you had the starters. And then you had just Rui, Dennis Schroeder, and then Malik Beasley and Troy Brown. They were benched. They didn't really play until garbage time, and he brought in Wenyen Gabriel instead, right? Because one of the big issues was whenever AD was off the floor, it was just LeBron and Rui out there, as the bigs, and that just didn't really work. But you put Wenyen Gabriel in there, and it's not like he's a great player or anything, but just having a guy out there that can actually play the role of an actual big,
Paint intimidation
that
helps.
helps. Yeah, exactly. Just as a guy that can roll, set screens, like you
Right.
said, protect the rim, get some block shots, just be active, right? He's an energy guy. Just in general, yeah, the defensive intensity, you could tell they were very much locked in. Again, they were trying to funnel everything defensively towards Anthony Davis. Which makes sense, right? He had 5 blocks, and even though he had 5 blocks, he also had many other shots, right, that he deterred,
Yeah.
that aren't counted as blocks. So that's a big difference. That's huge as well. Um, and again, just in general, I mean, like you said with D'Lo, obviously he had a really good game. You were kind of looking for him, to play better. Typically, when he plays well, that's usually when they're at their best, right? When either he or Austin Reeves, or preferably both, right? When one of those guys is playing really well, it's much harder to stop them, right? Because then you
Yeah.
have guards that can, create their own offense from the perimeter. But he had been kind of spotty this series, right? He had moments, right? He had that, I think it was game 4, right? Where he hit the threes in the fourth quarter, to
It
get him
was
back
three
into
of
the
them,
game.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then game 1, right? I thought, even though the overall numbers may not have looked great, I thought he was good. And then he was obviously great in this game. I think this was a playoff career high 31.
Yep.
And again, we talked about it earlier when the trade initially happened, right? He's playing for a big contract, so these type of games are the games where he needs to play well. If he wants to stay in LA and he wants to get that big contract, because I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a lock that he stays here, right? Because again,
Mm-mm.
he had some games where he didn't play very well, and it's not going to get any easier, right? Because you're going up against some other really good guards as well. But then going back to Memphis, right? I mean, he didn't really have anybody really play all that well.
No.
Santi Aldama, right? I guess he was okay. I guess. I mean,
I
I
mean,
think
he
he
was
was
their
their lead.
lead scorer,
Yeah,
16
he was their
points, but
lead
at the
scorer.
same time, a lot of people don't even know he is. Like, it's
Yeah,
just rough. I
yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, Desmond Bain, 15 points on 16 shots, right? I think for them, the adjustment defensively there was they had AD play a little higher in the screen and roll because Desmond Bain was getting shots off, midway through the series because they were setting more screens for him, but they weren't
Right.
playing high, right? And then once they got AD higher, right, then that made a difference. Ja, obviously, right, 2 for 7 from three, you give him those, right? Almost half of his shots were threes. I mean, that was kind of the issue. That's been the issue for Memphis all season is the 3-point shooting was a problem, right? They were not a great offensive team.
Right.
Obviously when they get stops and get out in transition, they're a defense first team, kind of like the Lakers, right? So they have to get stops, they have to get out in transition. Luke Kennard also, he had the shoulder issue. He
Yeah,
missed
that
this
was an
game.
issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I think his contributions, overall, even in games where he didn't play well, just having him out there, as a
Stretch the
shooter,
floor.
right? Because the thing with Dylan Brooks is that, they weren't even guarding him, right? Initially they were, I guess, kind of guarding him early on in the series, and then as it kept going, he was just left completely alone.
Yeah, they'll give him
Um,
those every time.
yeah, and you just, it's hard to have a guy out there, right, who's getting, great looks and just, still can't hit them.
Right.
I mean, you're left open for a reason. And I get that, like, he has a reputation as like a 3-and-D guy, but just in general, right? I mean, like, his play on offense at times hurt them. I mean, he wasn't the reason why they lost this game. I mean, you
No.
lose by 40, it's a collective effort. But just in general, right? I mean, I think for Memphis, this is why you need veterans on a team, right? Because just in general, um, you know, even though I do like the guys on Memphis, right? I know a lot of people, kind of despise this team, and feel like they're front runners, and they are. But just in general, this is where some veteran leadership, is kind of needed. Obviously, Adams is there, but I think you also need somebody on the court, as a leader, right? As a guy that can kind of get everything under control. I think that's kind of the value of having a guy like that because you just have, I think, a number of guys that just seem like they're a little immature, a little over their head. Um, and if you can get some older guys that have been through it, I think that would kind of help.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious with Memphis, right? Because Dylan Brooks, I think, is a free agent. So I do kind of wonder, if he comes back or if he just kind of goes somewhere else. Because I understand, like in terms of an attitude perspective, he's a physical guy and he's a good defensive player. But just his offense hurts them so bad. It just kind of feels like you'd like them to have probably like a more traditional 3-and-D wing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I was kind of hoping, that they would kind of go in and get the OG
Yeah,
Anunoby
we were
deal
both
done.
praying on that
Um,
one.
yeah, and it's not like Anunoby is an amazing player, but I just feel like, he
He would
probably
have
would
helped
still
them.
be a better option than Dylan Brooks. Um, so just in general, I do kind of wonder what they do. But like you said, I still think the future is bright for these guys. It's a very young team, and they can get better. But I do think, you kind of have to wear this one on the chin because you can't necessarily, go out there, and talk smack to guys, right? And then, you don't produce on the other end, and get wins for your team because that's kind of the most important thing, right? It'd be one thing if they were talking smack and, they won the series, right? But I mean, they got obliterated in this game. I mean, it's just it's just kind of baffling to me because I just again I think with Dylan Brooks I just think I just don't think you can do that to a guy like LeBron, particularly again when it's not like he's like a great player himself.
Right.
It'd be one. I mean, I understand like the role player talking trash and hyping up his team, but you got to be better. But I'm not gonna blame it all on him because again, one guy doesn't normally cost you a series, unless it's like on a single play. You just had a number of guys just not play that well, and again, without Adams and Clark, that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Just in terms of just bodies out there. They did a really good job, though, I will say, in terms of getting offensive rebounds. Because even though they don't, they didn't really have like like you said, the center depth. They do have a lot of big, strong guys. Even though they're not necessarily tall, right? But they have some stockiness, I guess, to them, right? Like Desmond Bain, as a guard, even though he's not super tall, right? He's a relatively strong guy. Dylan Brooks is kind of like a physical guy, right? Xavier Tillman, I think he actually honestly played really well in this series.
Yeah. A lot of
Wasn't great
hustle
tonight.
plays.
Not tonight, yeah. Wasn't great, in game 6, but
Yeah.
I think he's the guy where he could probably help them, at times. Because even with Steven Adams, like I think that there's gonna be some series where he's not gonna be much of a factor.
Right.
So, I do kind of wonder what they do, but I do think the future is bright. But just back to LA. Um, it is going to be interesting, right? Because we talked about all the upsets, right? They're the 7th seed. Memphis is the 2 seed, and I do think that's like you said. We both had Memphis to win the series, and I do think for a lot of people that was kind of the reason why Memphis was kind of looked at as the slight favorites because they're the 2 seed and they do
That's
have
why I
home
picked them.
court. Yeah, they were the best home team in the NBA. Um, but again, just in general, right? Like, I mean, it's injuries happen, right? And other teams are dealing with injuries too, and some that are more severe than Adams and Clark. But it's just if you're Memphis, I'm sure it just sucks, right? Because you had the regular season you had last year, right? Then you lost to the Warriors in a 6-game series. Where Ja missed half of it, so you felt like, oh, we'll be back, we'll be moving on up, right? And then, you have another solid regular season again, but then you had all those off the court issues.
Right.
Um, and I think that kind of derailed the team at some points. Ja said so himself, kind of, in the exit interview. And then, you go in the first round, where you're favored, and then, you kind of lay an egg in the last game. I mean, he pulled all the starters, I think, with about, 9-10 minutes to go, right? And I mean, the game was pretty much over at halftime.
Mm-hmm.
It was over really quickly. But just in general, I mean, you got to be disappointed if you're Memphis. And I do kind of wonder what they do, especially with the Dylan Brooks thing, because, I feel like the guys do like him, but, I just, in general, I feel like they could probably do better
They can
than
do
him.
better, but I think he's gonna stay. Like from what I've seen, it seems like he's a locker room presence. And I don't know if that's really a good thing. I don't know if you want a guy like that, in your locker room. But at the same time, you got to think about it like this. They are a team, and what he says is to hype up the team and get the team, thinking that they're those guys. So I understand keeping him around, and I think that's what they're gonna do. Because I mean, he's been there 5 or 6 years at least, right?
Something like that. I
Yeah,
can't remember the exact year he was drafted out of Oregon, but
yeah. So
oh,
he's been there.
2017.
Yeah, so he's been there for 6 years. So like, I don't think, I feel like he's gonna stick around because at the same time, like you said, he does hurt them on offense, but he does bring some sort of personality and identity to this team. But I feel like they're just missing a lot, and in terms of that perimeter shooting. And I feel like this series would have been a little bit different, if Steven Adams or, their other centers were there. But I don't, they may not have, won the series. Because my thing is with this exit, I don't have a problem with them getting eliminated. I have a problem with them getting eliminated in a 40-point loss. That's the issue that I have. Like, you
It
can't
felt like
act.
they quit.
Exactly. Like you can't act like you're, the big bad wolf, but then, come out here and like you said, lay an egg and lose by 40 in an elimination game. That's not a good look. I feel like they do have some promise. I think they're going to be a team that sticks around, but they still have a lot of work to do because like I said, I was not high on them at all, coming into this playoff series and like I said, the main reason I picked them was just because, they were favored in the seedings, and I thought that meant something, but this playoffs is kind of proving that your seeding doesn't matter. It's just how much you really want it, and the performance of your guys. That's what it comes down to. So it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah, I do kind of wonder, with Dylan Brooks, he mentioned he doesn't respect somebody until he gives them 40. But I mean, they did lose by 40, so I do wonder, if you get the respect there. But just
True.
going back,
True. I didn't even
yeah,
think of that.
yeah, but you're right with the regular season thing, because I do kind of wonder. I feel like that might be like a potential problem, that the NBA kind of has to figure out because it does feel like, like I mean, obviously the playoffs have still been really good, but I wonder, is it a good thing that we have, so many upsets,
It's not a
because
good thing.
I mean, obviously, they're great stories, but just in general, because you watch the regular season and then you watch the playoffs, you see teams not always trying in the regular season, having games where they literally just don't show up, and then they come into the playoffs and then it looks like a completely different situation. Not with all of these series, right?
Right,
Because
right, right.
the Lakers were playing well after the trade deadline, so it felt like there was some momentum there. But like with some of these other scenarios, I don't know. It's just kind of interesting, and I do kind of wonder, like, obviously we've always known that the regular season versus the playoffs are different,
And that's
but
in
even
any
still,
sport.
yeah, exactly. But even still, usually, right, the best team usually over the course because of the 7 game series in the NBA, it's very rare, right, that a low seed, advances past one round because it's just, you don't have home court advantage. Usually, if you're a lower seed, you're not as good. Obviously, it's always been about matchups as well, but
Hmm.
I can't remember a time that we've had like this many upsets. It's just, kind of crazy to me personally.
Yeah, I get that 100%, and it feels weird. And it's just so odd that like, and I'm still stuck on that whole Milwaukee thing. I'm sorry to circle back to that, but that was
I
like
am too.
that was last week or last episode. But like, I'm
Yeah.
still stunned on that. I mean, you can't go out as the number one seed like that. That's just rough.
Right.
And then now we have
Yeah.
Memphis losing, and the
Yeah.
Kings as well. So it's just weird.
I do want to throw in, I did hear a story that
What's up?
Mike Budenholzer's brother,
Okay.
he died in a car crash
Oh wow.
during the series. So,
Oh
I do
wow.
want to kind of throw that out there because, obviously, I criticized him
Yeah, me too.
for his coaching decisions at the end of the series, and you did as well. But
Wow.
I do kind of want to throw out my condolences there and,
Yeah.
just
Condolences. Yeah.
like, obviously, it's still not a good look to lose in that series, but, again, I haven't been in a situation like that, but I'm sure, being in a situation like that, I'm sure, like, your focus is probably just all over the
Yeah.
place. I'm sure sometimes he probably wasn't even thinking about basketball during the series. And it's really a shame that that happened. So I just wanted to kind of just throw that out there.
Yeah.
I still look at the season as a relative failure for Milwaukee, but I will give Budenholzer, somewhat of a pass just
Okay.
because again, a situation like that, just mentally, emotionally, that something like that is really hard, I think, to kind of just throw out, in a playoff game, because some things are bigger than basketball. And,
Yeah.
obviously family is one of them. And to be in a situation like that, in a playoff series, right, where you're under a lot of stress, you're under a lot of pressure to try to win. I'm gonna give him a pass for that. Like again, still some poor coaching decisions, but at the very least, I'll give him somewhat of an out just because again, I think a situation like that probably, kind of earns it.
Yeah, prayers for that. I had no clue. So thank you for, bringing me and, obviously our viewers up to speed. If you guys didn't know that, drop prayers, prayers for that completely. And, that's really sad to hear. And I, like you said, I definitely give them the pass too. Well, not the pass, but, a pass because like, that's rough because death takes a toll and, that's really hard to overcome and think about while also trying to make basketball and winning a championship a priority. So, prayers to that. But yeah, to circle back to the upsets, like, yeah, it's been crazy. I just don't know what's been going on. And like, I don't know. It's weird because if you think about it, most of the teams that have upset have been, championship teams, like, or, teams that have been in the finals, like if you
Very
look at
true.
Miami, the Warriors, Lakers,
Yeah,
it's just interesting that, a
yeah,
lot of these experienced teams are really showing their true colors in the postseason. So I think that is something that, the NBA does need to take a look at. Maybe, I'm not going to say change the format, but, maybe put on some stipulations in the regular season or something, I don't know. It's just a weird occurrence. And, maybe this is just a fluke and maybe, we'll never see this happen again, but
yeah.
this
That
is
could be
really
true.
odd. This is really odd to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, honestly, that could be true because there have been times in the past where, like, even like with a team, right, where you have a team that has like a great season, and then you're like, oh, they're on the up and up, and then you never see them ever again. So, So yeah, success can sometimes be kind of fleeting, but
Yeah.
I do kind of wonder where we are headed because I think that there could be an issue if you have a situation where in the regular season, right, you have a lot of teams that are kind of just underperforming and kind of just saving stuff for the playoffs, and then you get to the playoffs, right, and then the teams that uh, played a lot and did everything they needed to do in the regular season, right, they get kind of punished, right, because now they're matched up in a situation where just not everything's going their way. But obviously upsets can happen. Um, you know, and we've seen them before. Usually not at this level where there's like a high number of them, but you just never know. But like you said, that's a great point that I didn't think of, right? In terms of like, yeah, a lot of the championship or teams with high level of experience, are the teams that are pulling off the upsets. Yeah,
Hmm.
because you had a lot of young teams find a lot of success this season, but then come playoff time, it's the teams that have all the experience, that kind of close things out because they've been there before and they know what to do. And like I said, that was why I had the Warriors
Yes.
winning that series against the Kings because I just thought
They know
if it
how it
got to a
goes.
yeah, exactly. Because even in a game seven on the road, as bad as they've been on the road all year, they've been in game sevens before. And they've actually had games in game seven where they had to battle back.
They know that
And then,
desperation. They know what it feels
yeah,
like. They're
exactly.
hungry for it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, but just in general, yeah, it is something to kind of watch out for because I do wonder next season, obviously we got to get through this season, but it will be interesting next season to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
Because I do think it's something to keep an eye on. And that's kind of, I feel like that is why they're kind of trying to add all these caveats to the regular season, like tournaments, and all this other stuff. Because I think they've kind of caught on. Because we had a lot of people in the media for years saying that, like, oh, the regular season is kind of meaningless. Um, and like I feel like some people kind of push back on it. Obviously the NBA is going to push back on it, because they're not going to try to tell people like, hey, don't watch the regular season.
Yeah.
Um, but just in general, right? If they can come up with ways, I think, to make the regular season
They need
more
to shorten
interesting and
it.
entertaining.
That's what's gonna. If they shorten it,
Yeah,
that'll help. I guarantee
yeah,
you, because that means less
yeah,
missed time, all that stuff. It's just gonna make it
yeah.
feel better. We're gonna. Uh, I don't know how to describe it because there's so many ways that you can get into that, and I guess that could be a topic for another day. Because I guess we really do have to move on because we've got a
I would
couple
say
other
that.
games. Yeah, so we'll talk about that in the offseason. Maybe like we could do a segment where it's like ways to improve the NBA, our thoughts or something like that. Let us know in the comments if you guys want to see that. But I guess to move on into the next series that has started. So this is round two. So this is the Western semis.
Yep.
And this is Denver versus Phoenix. Denver came away with the win, 125-107. And I picked the Phoenix Suns to win this entire series, and I'm standing by that 100%. But to look at the Nuggets first, we got to start with the winners. Jamal Murray dropped 34 points, 9 assists, 5 rebounds, with some great highlights in between. And their offense looked really fluid. I can't even lie to you. I think this was a very well played game by Denver. Jokic had 24 points, 5 assists, 19 rebounds. And then you look at Michael Porter Jr., call him 11 points. Aaron Gordon played phenomenal. I thought he had some really big moments, key buckets. Caldwell Pope played decent as well. Bruce Brown Jr. had 14. That's the kind of contribution you'd want to see from Denver as well. And then, I thought the keys to victory for this series for the Suns would definitely be defense. Obviously, that takes prio, but rebounds as well. So they lost this rebounding battle, and then we look at the Suns. KD dropped 29. It's decent, but you kind of want to see more. I kind of want to see him in the 30s. 29 basically is 30, but I still want to see him higher 30s. But he also had 14 rebounds. Josh Okogie only 2 points. DeAndre Ayton 14 points, 1 assist, 7 rebounds. He, I think, is the X factor for this. I think we said that on the last episode. He needs to be on the boards. He needs to be aggressive, stay out of foul trouble because when he's off the court, it looks rough for Phoenix. And then we got Devin Booker who dropped 27 points, 8 assists, 4 rebounds. Then we have Chris Paul with 11 points, 5 assists. And for me, looking back on this game, this is a tone setter. Excuse me, for Denver. I think, the next game for them is a must win. If Phoenix takes the next game, then I think the Nuggets could be in a sticky situation. But with the Suns, they've got to find a way to defend Jamal Murray because I feel like this is a matchup nightmare. Jamal Murray and Chris Paul. If Chris Paul is going to be trying to guard him the majority of this series, then we might be seeing Jamal Murray average around 28 to 30 points per game. I just don't think Chris Paul is enough to keep up with him. But at the same time, if you're looking at this roster, you're not really sure who's going to guard him. I mean, I guess you could try and put Booker on him, but that's also somewhat of a matchup nightmare because I think Booker is probably going to get into some foul trouble just with how athletic Jamal Murray is and his ability to get downhill somewhat. But I don't know. This came as a surprise to me. I didn't think Phoenix was going to lose as bad as they did in this game. But like I said, I'm not really worried. I think I trust Devin Booker and Kevin Durant a little bit more than I do with Jamal Murray, Jokic, and Michael Porter Jr. But this was a game where Denver's supporting cast just simply outplayed. The Suns. The Suns didn't really have much in terms of depth, and we've said multiple times both of these teams aren't very deep. But I think you saw more contribution from the Nuggets end than you did on the Suns bench. What were your thoughts on this one? Because I thought it was very interesting and definitely a tone setter.
Yeah, I mean, so I didn't see the game live. I rewatched it.
Okay.
So on the rewatch, yeah, I mean, it was kind of funny because going into the series, I was really split. Because a part of me thought Denver, had a chance to beat Phoenix.
Right.
Just because I think they're a little more well-rounded. And I think they have more guys you could trust in Phoenix. But then part of me also kind of thought, well, Phoenix also has higher top end talent. So, to me, I feel like it's still going to be a long series. But, in this game, you mentioned Aiton as an X factor. I mean, just in general, I think, you kind of saw like this is kind of like the bad version, of what you're going to get out of the Suns, right? Where you're going to have an issue in terms of defense,
Yep.
guys being forced to play high level minutes, right? I mean, even in a game, right, where they lost by like 20 points, right? I mean, Devin Booker played 40 minutes, Durant played 36 minutes. Um, obviously, I think in terms of what you can do with Denver, I mean, obviously, Jokic, had the big game, wasn't efficient, right, but still was able to, have a really well-rounded game on the boards. Jamal Murray was great, right? This was kind of like the return of, bubble Jamal Murray, right? Because we
For
remember
sure.
in the bubble he was great for most of the postseason.
Yes.
Um, obviously, Michael Porter Jr. was kind of quiet, right? At least offensively.
Very calm. Yeah.
KCP's never gonna have a big high scoring night,
No.
usually, but obviously, he can hit timely shots and he can defend well. Aaron Gordon obviously was also a big star.
Hmm.
Bruce Brown right off the bench, that was a pickup for Denver that I really like,
Me
coming
too.
over from Brooklyn. Just another guy that you can put out there that can defend, that can give you energy, that plays hard. And then after that, right, like Jeff Green, Christian Brown. I mean, that's pretty much those guys, right? They pretty much have 8 guys that they pretty much trust.
It's a good rotation, I
You're
think.
not, yeah, exactly. You're not, just in general, I think my concern with Phoenix is, yeah, I kind of agree with you with the Murray thing, right? Because Paul, I don't think you can have him guard Jamal Murray.
No.
Um, Booker, I think can defend at times, but I don't necessarily think you want him, want to stick him on a
Exerting.
guy for long
No.
stretches. Maybe for possessions, but not necessarily like, having him from start to finish on Murray. I think that's why they started Josh Okogie over Torrey Craig because they started Craig against the Clippers, and I think this time they had Okogie, right? He's 6'4", he's a good athlete, so I think they probably felt like we can stick him on Jamal Murray, and that's the concern, right? Because you don't want Paul and Booker having to guard,
No.
um, high level offensive guards, right? But like you said, I mean, if they have to, right? I mean, it might be a problem, for them because again, when Jamal Murray's on his game, I mean, he's a really electrifying offensive player.
Yes.
So I do kind of wonder, like you said, going into this series, like I said, I was back and forth. I still lean towards Phoenix because of the high level talent, but again, at the same time, right? We talked about it with the last series against the Clippers, where despite them winning in a 5-game series, right? A lot of those games were close against basically the Clippers, B team.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, this was kind of, I think, the bad version of Phoenix. Obviously, I feel like they need to win game 2. Not that a series is over if you're down 2-0, but, you got to get, I think, one of the first 2 games in Denver, ideally, if you want to win. Obviously, we saw the Warriors, right, lose the first 2 games and still win the series. But just in general, right, like, you have to win at least one game in Denver. And I prefer usually to, if it was my team, right, I'd prefer to do it in one of the first 2 games. But it's tough because again, they don't have very many guys they can trust.
Right.
I mean, it's basically 5, 6 guys. I mean, um, and that's kind of the tough part again because it's not like Denver's bench is great, but they're still better, I think, collectively than Phoenix is. Um, just they have more guys they can trust, and I think that's one of the biggest differences, right? And again, we talked about Phoenix, right? 7 of 23 from three, Denver 16 of 37. That's the other issue with Phoenix is that they're not a high volume 3-point shooting team, even though they have great offensive talent, right? Booker and Durant.
ISO mid range.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of mid range shots, not a lot of three, right? Devin Booker at 27, he only took 1 3. Durant only took 3. And again, still the offensive box score numbers look fine, right? Booker at 27 and 8, Durant at 29 and 14, right? Way too many turnovers, right? I think they had 16, Durant had 7 of them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, that kind of needs to be cleaned up. Um, so again, I think, just in general, right? You need more from Chris Paul, you need more from Aiton. So this is if you're going to win this series, you pretty much have to have 4 or 5 guys all play pretty much like at the top of their game, right? Because
And
I
that
mean, if
goes
you
for Denver too.
yeah, exactly. Because I mean, that's the issue. Because I mean, for Phoenix, if you like, if obviously Durant and Booker pretty much have to be great every game, I think, in order for them to win. I think it's going to be very difficult for them to win games where they're not at the top of their game, unless you get like high level performances out of like Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton, and
Yeah.
they just don't seem like they can necessarily do it every night. But Ayton definitely was to me a big X factor against Jokic because obviously I don't think he's going to outplay Jokic
No.
over the course of the 7 game series, but if he can still give you really good production,
Put
right?
a
Like
body
I
on him.
exactly, if he can give you good production on the boards, just be a presence around the basket, just and not settling for jumpers. I think that's the problem, right? Because just with Phoenix, I mean, again, their offense is great, right? But just in general, right? Like, I mean, it's just tough because again, Denver, they take a lot of threes. I mean, Jamal Murray was 6 of 10 from three. I
Hmm.
mean, obviously, Durant or Booker could have those type of nights, but again, their preference is the mid range, and that's again, I don't want to boil it down to 3 versus 2, but that's just the problem, right? For Phoenix, if they're not gonna make a high volume of threes, they're gonna have to either play better defense or calm down with the turnovers, right? And if they don't do that, they're gonna lose this series. But like you said, I lean towards Phoenix as well. I still think they can win the series, even though they got blown out in game 1. But I do think they need to win game 2.
Yeah.
Because I think Denver can go on the road, and take a game.
That's my
Um,
point. I think Phoenix
yeah,
needs to
and
come out and set the
yeah,
tone too.
exactly. And in fairness, even if they don't, they're one of the best home teams, so if they can just win the series without having to win a road game.
Yeah.
But again, right, Phoenix, you have guys, right? Durant's done it before. Even though other guys haven't had much success in terms of championship runs, right? We did have some guys like Paul and Booker that did get to the NBA finals, along with DeAndre Ayton. And, again, it was a long 6 game series against the Bucks, so I'm not out on them just yet, but
No, me
I
neither.
think this was not a good game for Phoenix, and it needs to be better, right? It was close. It was right. The first quarter, I think Phoenix was up by 1, and then from after that point, it was pretty much a double-digit game for the rest of the way. So they got to be better. I think they will be better. I think they can be better. But again, they're gonna have to be better, or else they're not gonna win.
Yeah. And, the main issue with Phoenix right now for me is, they can't hide anyone on defense in this series. That Denver offense is way too fluid. And, DeAndre Ayton, I need to see more. I need to see a little bit more from him. I need him to show me that hunger. He's got to have that dog in him. And, he's got to get on the boards, be aggressive, and really put a body on Jokic. I need to see him not, stop Jokic, like you said, but I need to see him hinder him and maybe slow him down just a little bit, just enough to get the other guys going and, enough to maybe even have force Denver to maybe even sit Jokic, something like along those lines. But it's going to be hard because he can get into foul trouble. But I think this series is going to be a good one, and I'm probably going to lean towards game 7 or 6. I think it's going to go a
Yeah,
long ways just because of how talented both teams are. But it all comes
and I
down to consistency and defense for me for both of these
yeah.
squads.
Yeah, and I was also going to point out just in terms of transition, right? Like, Denver loves to run up and down the
Oh
floor.
yeah,
And that's something that Phoenix doesn't necessarily do as much. And that's going to kind of be something interesting to look at over the course of the series, right? Because you do have some older guys a little bit, right, with Paul, who loves to play, a much slower pace. right? Phoenix, just because of, the mid range and, their offensive skill sets, right? They typically play, a slower pace style of basketball. Obviously, if they get stops, they can get out in transition, and they have some pretty good, guys that can get out in transition like Durant or, Booker or whomever. But that's going to also be a big battle, right? Because again, Phoenix had 16 turnovers. That's a lot, right? That's going to help Denver a lot in terms of that transition offense. So that's something that they're going to have to clean up as
Yeah.
well, right? Because again, right, Denver loves to play fast. They love to play high tempo. They love to get out on the break, and either hoist up threes or get to the basket in transition. And that's a killer, right, against Denver, right, especially at home, right, because they can have stretches where they get hot, and when they get hot, they're really tough to stop. And again, that's why it was always kind of interesting with the Denver part of the equation in the Western Conference because they're the number one seed, right? But it feels like nobody's really talking about them, and or even really considering them as a potential, contender, to come out of the Western Conference, right? But I mean, it's a really good team. You have a great starting five. It just kind of comes down to the supporting cast for me, right? Because again,
Yeah.
Jamal Murray plays like this, where he's basically the best guard in the series, right? Then Denver's going to win.
Right.
But again, I think Booker can be better. I think Chris Paul is capable of having better games, even though you're not going to get it quite as consistently. And that's going to be the difference here, right? Because again, we talked about this when the trade happened was how are they going to defend guys in the backcourt
Right.
with Paul Booker, right? That's so, like I said, this is a series, right, where I'm assuming that's why they started a Kogi, right? Because he can probably guard guards better than Craig can. So he's going to have to step up defensively. But at the same time, right, it's going to be tough because Jamal Murray is not an easy cover.
No,
And
not at all.
I mean, yeah, and again, it's a team effort, right? So just in general, that's where they're going to have to step up. Defense, turnovers. But otherwise, if you're Denver, flawless game one for the most part. Got a little bit crazy at the end of the third, but still, again, you won by 18. You'll take it, right? That's a really good, like you said, a really good tone setter if you're Denver. So we'll kind of see where the series goes from here.
Yeah, and that Mile High environment is no joke either.
Yeah, the altitude, that's another factor for the
Yeah,
series in Denver with the altitude. And in term, and
and the
again,
crowd
especially
too.
yes, yeah, the altitude, the crowd, and especially again with Phoenix playing high level minutes, right? That altitude, right, might really get to them late in
Yeah,
the game. But again, these guys have played in Denver before, right? So over the course of a 7 game series, you're just gonna have to kind of play through it, I think. I mean, again, because if you want to get through the Western Conference, you got to get through Denver. So, and the
right.
only way to get through Denver is you're gonna have to go in there and win at least one time.
Yeah.
So,
And Denver
you
has a lot of question marks. And I think it's not even just their supporting cast, but it's because, they've come up so short in previous years as well. Um, but, I guess to move on into the next series, which occurred on Sunday, moving on into the East semis, this is Miami and New York. This was a wild game, I thought. Miami came away and stole one in MSG and, came away with the win, 108 to 101. I thought this was a good performance from some guys, but not a great one from the Heat. I would like to see more, but I'm happy for them. This is my dark horse. And this is going to be a smash mouth series. I think it's going to come down to probably 6 or 7 as well. Shout out to Jimmy Butler. He did roll his ankle, but he played through it. He had 25 points, 4 assists, 11 rebounds. You never want to see a guy go down like that, especially with the historic run and magical run that Jimmy's had this season. Kevin Love, 9 points. Bam, 16. I kind of want to see more from him. He did have 8 rebounds along with that, but Gabe Vincent, man, he had 20 points.
Mhm.
Big hero for this game, I think. Max Struss, 8 points, not too much. Caleb Martin, kind of want to see more. Kyle Lowry, 18 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds. I thought that was a solid game. I think that's the kind of game you want to see from Kyle Lowry. Huh?
4 blocks as well.
Exactly. So I think that's the kind of game you want to see from him. And then you look at the Knicks, shout out RJ. I thought he had a solid game, 26 points, 7 assists, 9 rebounds. I thought he really had a good first half. Not too much I don't know. He kind of cooled off in the fourth for me, but, good first, second, and third for me. Obi Toppin, 18 points. Kind of want to see more, especially considering where he was picked. But, he did have 18, so I guess that is pretty fair for him. Mitchell Robinson, 7 points, 14 rebounds. He's not really an offensive guy, but, he did his part. Josh Hart, 10 points, 4 assists, 8 rebounds. Thought this was interesting, too. Jalen Brunson, 25, 7 assists, or 25 points, 7 assists, 4 rebounds, or 5 rebounds. I thought this was solid. kind of wanted to see him take over and drop like around like 30, 35, but it is what it is. Can't ask that, of everybody. But he still had a good game, I thought. But I don't know. This is an ugly one, I thought too, but it was interesting nonetheless. And shout out to Miami. Like I said, they did steal us in MSG. That's you know no small task, I think. Um, but yeah, New York needs to work on their three. I think that's their issue, but they don't have the greatest scores from three, in my opinion. But it's their potential is there. They just need to be consistent and hit them. But I am concerned, with Jimmy Butler. I'm not sure if he's going to play next game. He probably will, just knowing who the guy is. He'll probably play, but he did roll his ankle, but he did finish the game. So, I guess that is a bright spot. But, overall, what were your thoughts on this game? Because it just seems like New York just can't hit a three, but,
Yeah.
we'll see
I
what
mean,
happens. And they didn't have Randall either, FYI.
yeah, exactly. The starters were a combined, I think, 5 of 26 from three, right? So
Yeah.
that's not necessarily gonna
Quickly
get it
cooled
done.
off, too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Obi Toppin, he started in place of Randall. 7 of 15, 4 of 11. I feel like he took a few too many 3-point shots, for a
Yeah.
guy who's a really good athlete. I'd like to see him mix it up a little bit. And because again, almost all of his shots were threes. He took 15 shots, 11 of them were threes.
Yeah, it's too high of a
I
volume.
Yeah, a guy that athletic. I mean, I get, floor spacing and all that other good stuff, but just in general, I feel like that was too much for him. Right, Brunson, 0 of 7 from 3, right? That's not going to get it done with 5 turnovers.
Right.
Um, Robinson, 7 points, 14 rebounds, 2 blocks, 1 airballed free throw. I mean, just in general, not a great offensive performance. I mean, obviously like, he's not much offensively, right? But he's great on the boards, good
For
as a
sure.
shot blocker. It was kind of interesting because in the first half, the Knicks I thought played relatively well, right? But then the Heat kind of chipped away, and then it felt like, wow, the Heat were as bad as they looked in the first quarter, right? It's a really close game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so then it felt like, okay, this is gonna go one of two ways, right? Either the Heat are gonna come out and pull this and out and pull away, or the Knicks are gonna kind of go back to playing well and close it out. And it went the way of the Heat. Kevin Love, you mentioned he had 9 points, right? 5 rebounds, some great outlet passes, right?
Yeah,
Miami
phenomenal.
made that. Yeah, Miami had that big run in the third, right, where they were able to get some stops, and he was a big part of them getting out in transition, right, where he would just throw these bullet outlet passes. He's been always been great at that
Yep.
over the course of his career. I still can't believe that Cleveland just bought him out and let him go, right? Considering
Dumb.
he's been pretty solid for the Heat this postseason, right? Only 16 minutes, right? But in the minutes he played, I thought he was effective. Um, like you mentioned, Bam, you'd like to see more, but just in general, it feels like this might just be what you're getting out of him just in general. I think he said his hamstring had been bothering him. He said he's good, but we'll see how that goes. Vincent, like you said, also an unsung hero, right? 6 of 16, right? Was kind of chucking a little bit, right? But he made some timely shots.
Yeah.
Made some big plays for them, right?
Yeah.
As a starter, right? Because Lowry was the starter, last year and early this year, right? But he's kind of come in as the starter, right? And it feels kind of interesting, right? Because in the starting five right now, the ball's in Butler's hands a lot more, right? And with Hero out, right, you kind of need other guys to get going. Right, like you said, he didn't have like an amazing offensive performance, right? Still a good stat line, 25, 11, and 4. Um,
Enough to get
but
the
just in
job
general,
done.
yeah, exactly, right? Just enough to get it done, right? Lowry, like you mentioned, had a huge game, right? This is kind of the Kyle Lowry you would have liked to have seen, last year in the playoffs, right?
Right.
He was battling injury for much of last season and much of this season. Obviously at this point he is older, so you kind of come to expect that, which is why it may not have been the best idea to give him the money that he got, but again, as a veteran, as a guy who's been part of a championship team, that's always, helpful, I think, come playoff time, particularly if they can still provide something on the court.
Yeah.
Um, Butler's ankle injury didn't look good.
No.
Wasn't sure if he was going to finish the game. He gutted it out, right? But, the offense was changed a lot down the stretch, right? He
He
was
didn't
just
even
kind of
touch the
camped out.
rock.
Exactly. He was just kind of camped out in the corner, right? And everybody else was kind of just, doing their thing offensively. They were running out the clock, right? Which I thought, I guess, was a good idea, right? Because, you had a decent lead, run out the clock, right? Make it harder, for the Knicks to kind of just go and score fast. And they couldn't do that, because their shooting, right, wasn't great either. And also it helped for Jimmy, right? Because he didn't have to move. They had him on Brunson at different points, right? So he had, really good defensive moments, right? But then, after the injury, right, he wasn't really doing that
Yeah.
anymore. again, going back to the Knicks, right, looking at other guys, like you mentioned, RJ Barrett kind of cooled off, but,
Yeah.
the last several games, he's been pretty solid offensively, which you need, right? Because, again, when he plays well, right, the Knicks are better.
Yeah. I
But
wanted to
obviously also,
there
Mhm.
sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but there's one thing that I heard about RJ which I thought was interesting. He changed his shooting motion after one
Yeah,
of the games, I think in the earlier series that they played, um, in the Cleveland series. So I
yeah,
think,
I did hear that.
ever since he changed it, he's been on fire. So I think that's a good sign, I guess. But, sorry to cut you off. I just did want to point that out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think shot selection wise, right? I mean, he was 1 of 5 from three, right? But it does feel like he's not taking quite as many like long jumpers because
Yeah.
the 3-point shot at this point, isn't really his game. He's more of an attacker.
He needs to use his
Um,
body.
yeah, exactly. But it was gonna be tough for the Knicks to win the game, even at home, just because without Randall, even though Randall's been kind of a spotty guy in the postseason, but again, he does, play a role as, one of their go-to guys
Yeah.
offensively, helping out on the boards, being another physical body out there. But again, he is battling an injury, so, a hobble Julius Randle may not help you a whole lot.
Right.
Um, but I do think they will need him to play well if they want to win the series, because he is one of their best players. So that's tough, right? Obviously, the Butler injury, may change some things. I'm gonna assume he's gonna play, right? But he may not be 100%, right? Because he's rolled that ankle a couple of times, even against the Bucks. Um, but again, like you said, gutsy performance by the Heat. Um, and again, like you said, if you're, the Heat were your dark horse, right? And obviously, if they want to get out of this series, they were going to have to win at least a game in the Garden, right? And it's great to, get it out of the way in game one,
Yeah.
right? So now you could lose every other game in New York and you can still win the series, just by closing it out at home. So obviously, again, big game one for them. Tough game one loss for the Knicks. I did lean the Knicks going into the series, but again, if Randall is not himself, I'm probably going to lean back towards the Heat just because, again, no Randall, I think, makes it a lot tougher for the Knicks offensively. I mean,
Hmm.
they can be better, but, I just think it's going to be hard, if Randall is like out or just hobbled for them to win. Because you're just going to need other guys to step up. And I mean, again, I'm not sure how many of these guys are going to step up at the same time, right? Because quickly is kind of cooled off, right? He hasn't been as effective so far in the postseason. He's had his moments, right? But
Right.
in general, not as good as he was, I think, in the regular season. Um, Quentin Grimes was moved to the bench, right? He had that injury, I think, to his shoulder.
Hmm.
Uh, right. So they've started Josh Hart. He's been fine, right? But just in general, right? You just need a little bit more. Maybe they can get more. We'll see. But I think Randall has to play if they want to win the series. If he's either not available or if he's like really really struggling physically, they're probably going to lose. But it also again it depends on Butler as well. So we'll see where these guys are at physically come game two. But great win for the Heat.
Oh
Come
yeah,
from
for sure.
behind, right? You're winning on the road. You're the eighth seed. Great run, great story for them so far this season. Just because, again, I thought this team was dead. For a long time over the course of the season, I was struggling to figure out whether or not the team, was just kind of like just, sleepwalking through the regular season like zombies, or if they were just bad. And then they laid an egg against the Hawks in the play-in game, and it
Yeah.
was like, I think they might just not be good. And then, they barely get out alive against the Bulls. But, since that point, I mean, they've been great. I mean, the shooting was going to cool off at some point. That was one of the reasons I think why they were able to beat the Bucks because they just literally could not miss. Um, but again, this was a game where you didn't shoot great from three, even though the other opponent shot much worse from three. But again, right? Like these are the type of games you need to win, right? Where you're on the road against a hot team, right? Where the Knicks, wrapped up their series in five as well. They've been playing great. They've been feeling themselves at this point. So, again, if you're the Heat, you got to be pleased. Obviously it sucks with Butler to come out with an injury, but hopefully he can, get back at it and still play the rest of the way.
Yeah, I think if you're a Heat fan, you there is some worry with Butler, but this kind of game is exactly what you want to see. You want to see your team fight till the very end, and especially away. I think that's a great sign for them. And I guess to look ahead a little bit, this is the only series that we haven't had any predictions on. Unless you wanted to cover some other series, did you have any other in mind? Because I was going to talk about the Lakers Warriors one.
Oh yeah. So obviously, on Monday we're gonna have I believe it's Nugget Suns game two.
Yeah,
And I think it's Celtics Sixers game
game
one.
one.
Obviously,
Yes.
yeah, Embiid's listed as doubtful. So it sounds like he's probably not going to play. Shams
Right.
suggested that his injury may be more serious than a
What did they
grade
say?
one sprain.
LCL?
Yeah, grade one LCL sprain. So obviously a knee injury. So
Right.
if he's not available to play, I don't think Philly has any chance of winning this series.
No.
Maybe they might be able to kind of steal game one if the guys, if Harden and Maxey and some of these other guys play really well. But if
Boston's
Embiid's
too good,
hobbled,
bro.
yeah, if Embiid is hobbled and he's just not right, then they're not going to win the series. I
No.
just don't think because again, to me, then you got to rely on guys like Harden and Tyrese Maxey. Harden has been battling injuries and he doesn't seem like he's the same. Um, and you need those guys to play well, right? Because it can't just be Embiid. And obviously, if Embiid's hobbled, it's going to be really tough.
Yeah.
And that kind of changes the course of that series because if he's just, because again, it sounds like he's not going to play game one. So but who knows? He might not play in some other games, right? If his injury is more serious than a grade one LCL sprain. I'm
Right.
curious to see where that goes. But obviously, with the added context of the injury, I think this series might go to Boston. And if he's not available, Boston might wrap that series up really quickly.
Yeah.
I think they have no chance without Embiid.
I agree with you 100%. And then, I guess fast forwarding a little bit to Tuesday, May 2nd, that's going to be the day that we're live streaming. So, after the Warriors Lakers game, game one of that series, we're going to go live and, you can hear our thoughts, like yada, yada, yada. But, for this series, I think this is going to be an interesting one.
Yeah.
And, I haven't really given this much thought, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be honest, just from a quick first glance,
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm going to have to take the Lakers on this one.
Really?
Yeah. And
Interesting.
I know that's kind of wild, but I'm going to have to take them because I just love the defense that the Lakers have. And I think I think AD is going to have to step up on this one. And I think this is probably going to be his time. I'm curious to see what D'Lo does as well. LeBron, obviously. I think there's some guys on this squad that could be some difference makers, especially against this Warriors team. And I'm really interested to see how the Warriors are going to play defensively against the Lakers as well, and offensively, because I think with the Warriors there's too many question marks considering that they have not played at the level that you really want them to. But come to close when it gets to closing time, I think that's going to be the difference maker. But I'm just curious how close these games are really going to be, considering that the Warriors, they're outside of Steph and Looney. Like I said, there's just not much going for them because Clay's kind of been a little bit cold. I know he's been averaging like 21 this postseason, but it's just not the same Clay that I think we're used to and that we pre-injury Clay, basically. So I think that's what the Warriors are missing. Wiggins still doesn't look like he has the complete rhythm back. Poole's looked pretty abysmal thus far. Draymond, he's still Draymond, but I just don't think he's going to be a insane factor against the Lakers. But, those are just my initial thoughts. And, I just need to really see game one. But, for right now, I'm picking the Lakers just because I feel like I'm a little bit more confident in LeBron and the team that they have right now than I am with the Warriors. But that could change because I know your pick to come out of the West is the Warriors, so I'm sure you won't go against that. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, as much as I, think it would be really interesting to see that happen, I just feel like I'm gonna have to lean towards Golden State. I think,
Okay,
they have home court, unlike in the previous series, they're gonna have home court advantage.
right,
They've been great at home all year, even though they did get blown out in Game 6 at the Chase Center. I think that that's gonna matter. Obviously, I think fatigue. It will be interesting to see if that plays a factor come Game 1 because they just had, a rough and tough 7-game series against the Kings, while the Lakers have kind of been, resting up for the whole weekend. For me, obviously, like you said, for the Lakers, AD to me is the key. Because unlike Memphis, the Warriors don't really have quite as many, guys with like, size and strength to kind of throw at AD. Obviously, you have Draymond, and he's generally had pretty good success guarding AD just because the guys that AD tends to struggle the most against is guys that are, kind of undersized and also really strong.
right,
Kind of like some of the guys on Memphis, because, usually like a big guy is usually too slow. And then a small guy, obviously, he can just, score over the top. Um, So I think, but obviously he has the ability to really play well against this team. If they can, kind of get him going and run some good sets for him offensively. LeBron, I still have concerns with his foot because it just feels like, in terms of his explosion, it just hasn't been as consistent.
For sure.
Um,
I get that.
yeah, I mean, with the guards, I think the X factor is going to come down to the Laker guards because if they can play at a high level, that's going to allow LeBron to not have to play on the ball as much. Because that was kind of one of the other things that got him going in Game 6 against Memphis was, because D'Lo had that offensive explosion in the game, they were really, keying in on him. And that kind of allowed LeBron, to just kind of take possessions off and rest and, and again, set screens, play like a big, play off the ball. Cause that's kind of his transition now as a player, as he enters, the last part of his career.
Hmm.
Because I just think at this point, you need certain types of players around him in order to maximize him. I don't think at this point you can just have just anybody around him and it can be a really good team. Um, so for me, I think that's the X factor is the guards. In addition to AD, the bench, right? Some of the guys that the Lakers nabbed at the deadline, like Malik Beasley, he just hasn't been that effective as of
No.
late. Obviously, I think it'll be interesting to see if they play him at all. It wouldn't surprise me if they didn't, right? Because they've been way better when he's not out there as of late, just because he doesn't give you much defensively, and if he's not knocking down his shots, he's just not going to help you. Troy Brown at times has been okay, right? But
Really, you think
he's
so? I don't think so at all. I
I
think
meant
he's
like
been
over the course
terrible.
of the regular season. I meant like
Even
over the
then, I
course of
don't think he's been that good, and that's coming from a Wizards guy. Like I just
I mean,
never liked his game, to be honest. But
not get it.
that's probably Wizards
He shot,
bias.
yeah. Yeah, he shot 38% from three in the regular season. And gave them some help defensively and on the boards, but it just felt like against Memphis, it was a little bit the moment was a little bit too big for him.
A little bit, yeah.
So my concern is just in terms of the guards, they don't really have like a super high level defensive guard, right? Like D'Lo obviously isn't going to give you a whole lot defensively.
Right.
Reeves at times is okay defensively, but obviously he's going to have his hands full, against these Warriors guards. Dennis Schroeder pretty much is like their kind of go-to defensive guard as a point of attack guy. It's just the issue is he's so small. He's fast, he's tough. But that's a tough matchup to ask him to try to guard, Stephen Curry or Jordan Poole. Just because those guys have a little bit more size than him, um, even though he's really quick. And then obviously, going back to the Warriors, right? Looney, that's kind of an X factor to me, right? Because, offensively, in terms of his scoring, right, he's not going to give you like a high level amount of points, but
Yeah.
we saw against the Kings, he did a great job in terms of getting offensive rebounds. Being able to kind of stick with Sabonis defensively because he's so strong, even though he's, doesn't look like he can jump over a piece of paper. Um, he just seems like a very high IQ guy, fits in with the Warriors. That's an X factor because if you're the Lakers, you have to keep him off the boards. And I feel like it's gonna be tough.
Really.
Because yeah, because the issue is with AD is that that's pretty much what the Lakers defense is built around, is it's him.
Right.
So anytime he's like kind of away from the basket, it's a lot easier for teams to score around the rim, unless somebody helps. My guess is right, Vanderbilt's probably gonna guard Steph for the most part, just because he's 6'8", he's got
Yes.
long arms.
Can fight through those
But
screens too.
yeah, exactly, yeah. Just in general, it's gonna be interesting, right? Because I think in the regular season, right, they used Schroeder, Reeves, and D'Lo kind of defensively more so with the guards. But again, the regular season is different, right? Because again, we've talked about regular season matchups before. Don't take them into account when you're looking at the
No,
postseason.
you can't.
And just in general, like you said, it is interesting because I do think it is close because they're two completely different teams. Because LA is a
Yes, I
defensive
was gonna say
team.
that.
The Warriors can obviously defend at a high level when they need to, right? But obviously their biggest strength is their perimeter shooting, which is not the Lakers' biggest strength. Unless their guards are getting it going. But I just think that's going to be the tough thing. Is I just think offensively, again, it's kind of like what I was concerned about against Memphis. How are they going to score against the Warriors? Um, just because again, like their defense, they have some really good defensive guys, right? Wiggins, Draymond, Looney, Gary Payton. So I just think that's going to be an issue. And this is kind of where I think the Lakers, even though I hate saying this again, I think this is where they're going to miss a guy like an Alex Caruso because he
Okay.
was a really good defensive guard for
Sure.
them. And I just think without having those type of guys, I think it's going to be really tough for them to stop Golden State. It wouldn't shock me if the Lakers beat the Warriors because again, I think it's very close. And the Lakers have been very good since the trade deadline.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best teams in the Western Conference. So don't necessarily look at the 7 seed as that, right? They're better than your typical 7 seed, but I think the Warriors are also probably better than your typical 6 seed.
For sure.
Um, it just kind of comes down to, I think, for the Lakers, the guards. If they can, obviously they're not going to outplay Steph and Clay and Jordan Poole collectively, but if they can be really good, I think that's where the Lakers have a chance to beat the Warriors. I just don't know over the course of a 7 game series if I can trust D'Angelo Russell just to play at a high level. Because again, he's had some good games against Memphis, but he also had some real stinkers, and
Yeah.
I don't think they can get away with that against the Warriors and win. Because they had a couple of games where they like won, I guess, in spite of him, I guess.
Okay.
But
That's fair.
just in general, I don't know if I can trust him to play at a high level consistently against this team. But it's going to be interesting because I do think it's a very close series. This is not a scenario where I think that the Warriors are going to just stomp over the Lakers.
No.
And even after game 1, like I need to see like probably 3, 4 games because I just think
Really?
again,
I just need to see one for me.
I just think for me like it's just the Warriors are so good at home, but then they're
Okay.
so awful on the road. I could see a
Fair.
scenario where the Warriors take the first couple of games and then drop the next couple of games in LA because obviously the LA home crowd is nuts as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the key for me. But obviously, like if it's like 3-0 or something like that, right, it's going to be over. But I do think this is the series to look at in the second round, right? We get Steph versus LeBron again. Obviously those guys are really tight now, but there was a stretch I think where they had like a real, you know, legitimate rivalry going on.
Yeah, I
While the
believe so.
yeah, but I think they're tight now. Obviously, Draymond, he's gets to play against LeBron again. Obviously, those guys, seem like they're the best of friends. Ever since the thing that happened in 2016. It seems like Draymond just can't stop talking about LeBron in terms of all the positive things. So
Yeah.
it is kind of interesting, to see that. Um, but again, like you said, I definitely can see the Lakers winning the series. And again, you look at ESPN, when you look at the matchup predictor, I mean, it's basically 50-50. I think they have the Warriors at 50 and a half and the Lakers at 49 and a half. So everybody thinks this is going to be a really close series. It's just for me, I'm just concerned about how the Lakers offensively can get going at times.
Okay.
And I just think defensively, it's going to be harder because I think Golden State is a better offensive team than Memphis.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, Steph, is a completely different type of cover than Ja, right? Because,
Steph's a matchup nightmare, bro. You
yeah,
can't. It's
exactly.
hard to game plan for that. You really
Yeah,
can't.
exactly. Because with Ja, you can live with him taking, threes, in terms of like pull up jumpers
Yeah.
and all that. You don't really want to do that against Steph. It wouldn't surprise me if the Lakers played drop coverage because I guess technically, like, you want Steph to take the super difficult threes. It's just the problem is he can make them. And if he gets it going, right, there's basically nothing you can do. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the concern for me is I don't think they're gonna have much of an answer for Steph. And if he's the best player on the floor, which I think is very possible, then the Warriors are probably gonna win. Because I just think with LeBron's foot issue, I just don't know how much I can get out of him from game to game. But if the other guys can show up for the Lakers, I think that they do have a chance. I think either team can win, and it wouldn't shock me if either team won the series. I mean, the Warriors were my pick to come out of the West, but the Lakers were also my dark horse pick in the Western Conference. And I think
Yeah.
so far, both teams have really answered the bell in terms of answering a lot of questions about what they would look like come the postseason. Because again, the Warriors were favored to beat the Kings. And
Right.
we thought they would beat the Kings. And like you said, in fairness, which I understand why you might pick the Lakers because, it wasn't like it was an easy 7 game series, right? A
Mm-mm.
7 game series is never easy, right? And they had
No.
come off a 20-point loss to the Kings. I mean, obviously the Lakers have guys that have way more experience than the Sacramento guys. So that makes a lot of sense. I guess for me, it's just like the Warriors collectively have more experience, even
I
though
get it.
LeBron has, yeah, even though LeBron has about, as much experience as anybody could ever have. I just think in terms of the Warriors that I think this is where the continuity part might hurt the Lakers because again, Steph, Clay, and Draymond have played together for literally a
I
decade.
get it.
So I think that's the tough part. But again, I don't think it's wrong at all to pick the Lakers because it's a really good team, and I think they're better than a lot of people, realize and give them credit for. Because I mean, again, we look at them as a 7 seed. Their record isn't great, but again, like once you get to the 4 or 5 seed, nobody's record is really that outstanding. I mean, it was basically Denver, Memphis, Sacramento, and after that, everybody else was pretty much like 45 or fewer wins.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's going to be close, and it should be a great series. This is the series I think everybody was really hoping for, as NBA fans, right? Obviously, if the Kings got out, no one would complain, but I think most people wanted the Warriors to win just to see Steph and LeBron play against each other again. It just sucks that it's the second round as opposed to like the conference
Conference
finals or
finals,
something.
yeah. Um, and I think it's going to be really entertaining. Two different styles of play, two completely different teams. But I think this is a series where style of play is going to come into
Exactly.
like the forefront, because I don't think Looney's going to have the same impact against Anthony Davis that he did against Sabonis. I feel like Anthony Davis is significantly better than Sabonis.
Oh yeah.
And then when it comes to pacing, the Lakers do like to play a lot slower. They like to walk it up a little bit more and definitely don't shoot nearly as many threes. So I guess
No.
it'll be a thing of where
They
whose
can
style is going to win.
they can win games without making a high amount of threes.
Yeah.
Whereas with Sacramento, if their three isn't falling, it's really hard for them to win. Because again, it's just they can't necessarily get stops, right? Because again, the Lakers defensively at the rim, right, with AD, that's pretty good. Like you said, I think AD obviously is a tougher matchup than Sabonis,
Yeah.
just because again, the athleticism factor, the two-way play, right, the length, the skill. I think that it's definitely a hard cover. It's just again, it's just kind of interesting because against Memphis, right, AD had some games where he was great on both ends of the floor, and then he had some other games where even though he was great defensively, his offense seemed like it was really bad. So that needs to get cleaned up. And then free throws, I think, is going to be interesting in terms of how that works because the Lakers as a team over the course of the season, they tend to get to the line a lot, and they also, because of their defense, foul the least of a lot of teams. Golden State is a team that tends to foul more than any other team. That lack of size sometimes is where it hurts.
Right.
So that's going to be kind of an interesting factor as well. And also, the Warriors again, right? Like, obviously we saw against the Kings, they can adjust and get to the basket, but it's not necessarily like their ideal play style. It's more so like when people overhelp on the shooters is when they get a lot more drives. But again, I think, like you said, it's going to be a lot tougher to drive on Anthony Davis at the rim than Domantas Sabonis, right? So
Exactly.
that is a factor there.
Yeah, 80 is the big X factor for me. But as of right
Yeah.
now, I don't think, we should switch our picks at all. But, as of right now, I'm taking the Lakers on this one.
Wrap up, I guess, with the news. Um, Pretty much just mainly a couple of Houston things and one Cleveland thing. So we got Rockets want stars. So according to the Athletic, it sounds like Houston is going star hunting, right? Which again makes sense. I don't think they'll have their pick next year, so obviously it's going to be really important, for them to kind of put together a decent team.
Yeah.
Uh, and again, getting a veteran guy, right? Like we talked about with Memphis, I think that helps. So they mentioned names like Harden, Jalen Brown, Chris Middleton. Obviously this isn't the first time we heard the Harden one. In terms of him going there, I just don't think he'd be a great fit there. I understand, like, they just hired Udoka, and I think he'll preach accountability to a lot of those guys, but I don't know. Even though we've heard the Harden thing over and over and over again, I still don't get it. I
Yeah.
just don't understand it. I mean, it would just be really strange, that he wanted out of Houston to go to Brooklyn, then wanted out of Brooklyn, which I understand with the Kyrie thing, goes to Philly, and now he wants out of Philly. I just think that's just kind of strange. I mean,
Yeah.
the other guys I understand, Jalen Brown in terms of being like a young, really good star. The Middleton one's kind of weird, just because again he's had some injuries, and even though he played well in some games, I do have some concerns physically about what he's gonna look like. Hopefully he has a good, healthy recovery in the offseason, but I don't know about that one. I don't know. All these decisions are, all these guys are kind of weird to me. Jalen Brown, I guess, if you're Houston, is probably the most ideal one, just in
Yeah.
terms of like age, talent level, and I guess maturity. Um, I'm not as high on the other guys, but I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Jalen Brown is definitely the guy you want to target, but I don't think Boston's going to give him up unless, Jalen Brown does ask out. I know there was a rift going on between him and the fan base, but I feel like they kind of squashed that pretty quickly, especially behind the scenes. So, like I said, I think, he is the guy that you would want to target, but I just don't. I feel like you should target veterans and then, you know, build up the guys that you drafted. I feel like it's a little bit too early to give up, on Jalen Green. I think, he's a good player. He has some promise, definitely some raw talent. But with the right guys, the right coach, the right vets around him, I think he could really be a superstar. Um, and I just don't understand that. I know they want to contend as quick as possible because that's kind of what they're they're used to. They did have a long time where they were pretty much contenders every year, but now it's just like, they're just in the rebuild, and I just feel like the organization is kind of getting a little hasty with it. You can't rush a rebuild, so I think that's where they're approaching it wrong. But I just I don't understand the Harden thing, like you said. Definitely don't understand the Middleton thing. I feel like he's kind of not at the end of his career, but he needs to prove that he can bounce back before you want some interest in him. But I don't know. It's just a weird thing. I think it's a mess down in Houston. So, but I feel like we're gonna keep hearing more and more rumors, as the days go by in their off season.
Yeah, and just to add a correction, it was actually Yahoo Sports, not The
Okay,
Athletic. So my
gotcha.
bad. But
No, you're good.
to continue with the Yahoo Sports thing, Jalen Green they mentioned could be traded. Rockets may be willing to deal young star to accelerate their return to playoff contention. Again, that one is kind of odd to me. Again, I know
I
he's
don't get
kind of
it.
been like a sort of a polarizing figure. Because even though he is a guy that's a scorer, it does kind of feel empty calorie-ish, not necessarily efficient.
Right.
Um, I do think just in general, because Houston has been such a mess the last couple of years, I am kind of willing to give him a little bit of a pass in terms of,
Exactly.
what he's been doing. And again, like also it's just a very oddly constructed roster, right? You have Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green in the starting lineup. I
Can't
just
do
don't
that.
think that's a good combination.
Nope.
Um, because I just feel like, and again, it's not even necessarily that Kevin Porter Jr. is bad or anything, but again, like
They're the same
he's not a
player,
point guard.
basically.
Yeah, he's not a point guard, and I just think, ideally, it doesn't have to be like a ball dominant point guard that controls the offense, right? But I mean, like, I just think a guy that's like a score first guard next to Jalen Green, who's also a score first guard, I just don't necessarily like that combination. I mean,
No.
especially if neither of them are really going to be high level defenders. I mean, I'm not a big fan of that. But I don't think it. I think it's still too early to give up on Jalen Green just yet. I mean, I still think he's a talented scorer. He's got nights where when he gets it going, it looks really good. I understand, right? Like I said, sometimes he can take some bad shots, not always efficient. But again, like, let's see what it looks like with the new coach in Ime Udoka, who does have, more of a resume, compared to Silas. Even though, Silas again seems like a good guy, right? But obviously Udoka took a team to the finals. He seemed like he kind of gave them sort of a tough-minded identity, right? Because Boston was kind of a team that at times, felt,
They got
like
rolled
they would
over a
kind of,
lot.
yeah, would get rolled over. But with Udoka, they were really tough. Obviously, they ran into the Warriors, but I just think, let's see what a new coach looks like. New offense, maybe some new personnel with some new young players. Maybe they get one Banyama. We'll see.
I have a
Um,
question. So,
yeah.
is John Wall down there?
No, he's been a free agent. I mean, he's
Okay, so
not on
they
a team.
so they completely bought him out.
Yeah, they bought him out.
Okay, never mind then, because
Yeah.
I was gonna say
So
that would be interesting if he was still in their
yeah,
sights, but that's interesting.
yeah, but I don't know. Just in general, like I think, and also like I feel like right now you'd probably be kind of selling low because I mean, like I don't feel like I usually hear a lot of stuff about like a team has a lot of interest in him.
Right.
So I feel like you might want to wait until he kind of shows that he's really 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 valuable as something other than just a scorer.
Yeah,
Because I mean, but then at the same time, if he improves and becomes a lot more well rounded, you may not want to trade him. But
that's
I
my
just
point.
think
It's too early.
yeah. Exactly. He's 21. I mean, he was on a team that was basically, not really doing much of anything, in any sense of the word. So I'm not ready to give up on him yet.
He had the wrong
But I
system and
do,
the wrong guys and the wrong coach around him. Simple as that.
but I do understand the frustration. But again, like, I mean, there was nothing about that team, like, to me that felt like, oh yeah, like it was all on the players and not
No,
just, yeah, like,
it was a whole
I mean, I
collective
don't.
mess.
Yeah, exactly.
Still
And
is.
again, that's why I would have veterans. That's why I would have somebody who would command the respect of everybody in the locker room. You just got to get some adults in there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And again, maybe they get adults and it's still a mess, but I think there's still some time to figure that out. Um, and then I guess the last rumor or part of the news mill, JB Bickerstaff, right, head coach of the Cavs, right? The Cavs went out in the first round in 5 to the Knicks. Cavs president of basketball ops says head coach returning is not even a question after playoff exit. I think there were a lot of people who kind of felt like he didn't do a good job
Yeah.
in terms of coaching against the Knicks. There were things that I thought he did that were okay, but I also just think in general they were just missing some personnel that I think could have really helped them. Not having any real wings, I think really hurt them. Not having a backup big so that way you don't always have to play Allen and Mobley together
Right.
because it just felt like that pairing at times was kind of hurting them offensively. They just had some real issues in terms of scoring and shooting. So again, I'm not saying that the coaching job was perfect,
Right.
but I also think if you can get some better personnel, that will help. But again, like I mean, if you're Cleveland, you're on the clock because you gave up a decent amount to get Donovan Mitchell. And again, like he's your guy. And you got to figure this out, right? Because I mean, you don't want to be in a situation where you gave up a lot to get somebody and you don't get anything out of it. And I mean, obviously, I think a championship isn't necessarily the, you know, the goal for this team right now. But I mean, obviously, you got to do better than going out in five in the
I
first
think you
round.
got
I
to
think
at least get to the second.
yeah, I think yeah, exactly. Next year, I think if you can get the wings and the backup big, which is going to be hard to do, right? Because they're kind of in a tough spot. Paying some of these guys like Allen, Garland, Mitchell, and eventually Mobley. Paying those guys are going to get paid a lot of money. But just in general, right? Like he did okay. I mean, it wasn't great, but also like again, the issue we talked about with Cleveland was the lack of wings was going to hurt them. We
Yeah.
just didn't know if it was going to hurt them against the Knicks, but it did because R.J. Barrett played very well, and if he's going to play very well at a high level, the Cavs had no answer for that.
Yeah. And for me with, Bickerstaff, I don't think he's, I think he had some lapses in judgment, definitely some rotational lapses, but, he kind of did the best that he could with the roster that he had in front of him. And I don't think he had any fireable offenses. So I don't think this comes to a surprise for me. I did see a lot of Cleveland fans basically coming for his head top, but I don't really understand that. I think that's just more so coping methods, but I don't think he should be fired. So I don't have a problem with him returning at all. I think that's a smart move because I think he's a decent coach.
Yeah, it is kind of funny with the coaches because it always does feel like when a team is losing, it always feels like one of the go-to things is to always blame the coach.
Yeah. We said that
Every
on
single
previous episodes,
yeah,
like
exactly.
with the Wizards, every time we lose, they still say fire Scott Brooks. So,
Yeah, exactly. And even teams that have, great coaches, right? Like sometimes you'll go online, let's say like when the Warriors lost game 6 and you'll see a lot of fans, saying like, Steve Kerr did an awful job and I'm just like the
right.
guy has 4 titles as a head coach. I mean, he's clearly shown he can coach. I mean,
That's like saying
obviously,
the Spurs are bad because of Popovich. What?
yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, like it's not going to be great necessarily every game, but I mean, the guy's proven he can coach.
Right.
I mean, I understand like if you're, complaining about, maybe a team, some other team, right, that doesn't have a championship caliber coach. But then at the same time, like if you're Houston, I mean, I think you had other problems besides just the coach. I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
saying Silas was great, right? But like you also didn't have a good roster. So like, I mean, if you had the same roster with a different coach, would they really be that much better? Probably not. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Houston's a little better because ideally you'd have a top 3 pick in a draft like this, you can't mess that up. I wouldn't think.
Exactly.
But yeah, just with the Bickerstaff thing, yeah, I think he's fine, right? And the Cavs had a great regular season, but there were signs, right? Because we talked about like we didn't necessarily buy them as like a true contender because of some of the issues with the roster. Um, so I think that was kind of the biggest issue, with them losing to the Knicks, more so than I think the coaching. And again, I always think that coaching does play a factor. Especially in the playoffs, right? You can kind of see which guys, are really prepared in terms of coaching game plans. But I also think at the end of the day in the NBA, it also comes down to the talent as well, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes you need talent to win. You need talent in different areas to win. And if you don't have it, right, then sometimes you're just not going to win, right? Like obviously you could have a really good coach that can kind of maximize what he can do with a roster. I think Mike Brown did that with Sacramento, but I mean, they also had no rim protection and not a lot of great, defensive players. So it's like,
Right.
You got as good as you could get out of them, right? But at the end of the day, you still were missing key pieces in order to really put you over the top. So I'm not necessarily going to blame, Bickerstaff as much for that. Obviously, like I said, not a great coaching performance, but I think they had other issues in terms of personnel. I still can't get over the fact that they just let Kevin Love go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
on Miami.
That was dumb. I still
Yeah,
don't
and
understand that.
exactly. And he's starting for the Heat and he's playing relatively well. And it's like, he could have been a guy that could have helped you out against the Knicks just as a
Exactly. I
guy.
don't get that. I really don't
Yeah,
get that.
yeah, just as a guy who can space the floor, grab you a couple rebounds, right? He's a smart player. He's been in, tough playoff situations before. I mean, I didn't understand that at the time because I remember, there were rumors about him not getting bought out, and I'm like, I kind of thought he wasn't going to get bought out, but then I also thought he might. But it just didn't make any sense to me because I understand, like I said, that he hurt his hand earlier in the season, but he was playing really well during the early part of the season. Then he hurts his hand and his, level of play drops off. Then his minutes completely go away. So that one I think was kind of a miss by the Cavs staff because I
Yeah.
think they could have really used him. And again, I'm not trying to pretend like Kevin Love alone changes the outcome of this series, right? But just in general, I think it came down more to roster construction than coaching.
Right. I agree 100%.
Yeah. Well, all right. So that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, another long one again, but it is the playoffs. And, there's always a lot to discuss when it comes
Yeah.
to the playoff teams. Now we're in the second round, so things are really heating up. Again, we appreciate the support. Our last YouTube short was, our most successful one to date. So we really appreciate that. We want to shout out everybody who took a look at those.
Yeah. Appreciate y'all,
And
man.
exactly. And again, as we talked about, we are planning on live streaming after the Lakers Warriors game one on Tuesday. So hop on in and chat with us if you can. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for all the support, and hopefully we will see you next week.